right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar this morning. It's called, as you can see on the screen, a short-term fix, dealing with short-term rentals and nuisance and condos. So we are still getting quite a number of attendees joining, but we felt that we want to get started because we want to, respect your time and make sure that we're within the scheduled time frame from 11 to 12 today. First of all, I'd like to introduce our esteemed panelists, starting with Anthony Ng with Condonexus and our technical moderator as well. He's playing multiple roles today.
Let's change the name.
Excellent. And I'm just going in order of how you appear on my screen. But next I have Katherine Gow with Crossbridge Condominium Services and Ben Tabesh with Condor Security. So I am Luis Hernandez. I'm a lawyer with LDDC Lawyers. And, I really have to extend my thank yous to Anthony and Condonexus for putting this presentation together. And I think it's really important to point out as well that for all of you managers in the room, the virtual room today, this is an eligible continuing professional education course under the CMRAO. So you are eligible for 1 hour. So please make sure to note that down. It is on the CMRAO website as well, but we're really happy to have you here. And we'll just jump right into it. So today we're talking about short-term rentals. And I've been around long enough to know that this has been a topic that's been discussed for a very, very long time now in the condo industry. It feels like it's been a constant topic, and given the amount of attendees today, and I don't need to announce quorum, thankfully, given the amount of attendees, clearly it's still a very relevant topic in Ontario and very likely in the GTA, where I'm assuming a large majority of you are from. But don't let my assumptions think any less. I know Airbnbs happen everywhere outside of the GTA also. So the way that we're going to do this today is we don't want to reiterate and bore you with the same information that always gets presented on short-term rentals. If you're here today, you've probably been to other ones because of the relevance of the topic. But what we want to do is have a high-level discussion on, the boring stuff that I like to talk about, the law, the municipal regulations, and then really hear from the people on the ground, hear from Katherine, hear from Benjamin about experiences that they've had in their condos, what they've done to actually deal with short-term rentals. And I will be peppering in legal commentary throughout as the moderator for today. Anthony will be presenting some really fantastic tools, and we'll discuss how even his role as a meeting moderator and the additional tools that he's going to talk about, how they impact short-term rentals and condos. So we're not going to have a formal tons of slides or anything like that. And I'm just going to get started. So most of you probably already know, but a short-term rental has slightly different definitions where you go in the province. Every municipality, or not every municipality, but many municipalities have implemented different short-term rental bylaws to try and manage this problem. And I'll let the pros talk about the problems that they see on a day-to-day basis. But from a high level, most of these municipalities, they've defined short-term rentals as being a renting of a dwelling unit, so a residential unit, out for less than 28 consecutive days for payment. So that means it can include bed and breakfasts, but it generally excludes hotels and motels, which are under their own separate category. In Toronto specifically, we've implemented a very detailed short-term rental bylaw that creates a process to allow short-term rentals to occur. And there's a couple of very strict requirements with respect to that. The first one is, for it to be short-term rentals, it must be under 28 days. The second one is you can only short-term rent your principal residence. And if you are a short-term renter, you need to become a registered short-term rental operator. So that means that you are registering with the City of Toronto that you are engaging in this business practice. And then there are short-term rental companies, and these are the facilitating companies. They are the Airbnbs, the Booking.coms, the VRBOs, and I'm not going to list any more because this isn't an advertisement for them. We're trying to stop them or regulate them. And the city of Toronto has set this up so that people have a mechanism to actually engage in the practice of short-term rentals, but in a way that is regulated and fair and protects the consumer, being the short-term renters, the guests, but also protects the communities that they are engaging in. So many of the condos that you are all a part of and that are the ones that are being affected by having these guests and turning regular condos into, in some cases, feeling like hotels. So insofar as short-term rentals can be regulated or controlled from a condo perspective, it really comes down to what's in your governing documents. So you've already got the municipal bylaws in place, and depending where you're joining us from, you'll want to check what your municipal bylaws say. But assuming you're in Toronto, it is permitted if it's your permanent residence. However, if you are in a condo, you know that there are additional restrictions, and those restrictions can be contained in your declaration and most likely not your bylaws, but then also your rules. And in your declarations, the most important restriction to be mindful of is what's called a single family use provision. So I'm not going to bore you with all the case law, but there's plenty of case law out there that says if you have a single family use provision in your condominium's declaration, then that is inherently contradictory to the practice of a short-term rental business. They are not compatible practices. So short-term rentals are in effect prohibited from buildings where a single family use provision exists. Additionally, you can implement restrictions with respect to leasing terms, and you can implement restrictions in your rules that talk about how transient tenancies are treated. You can outright prohibit them if it's not contradictory to your declaration. I will say there are declarations out there that explicitly permit short-term rentals as well. So you need to be mindful of that also. And I don't want to get ahead of ourselves because Ben and Katherine will talk about this, but there is also a regulation versus prohibition conversation that happens in short-term rentals, which is if your condo permits them, how do you regulate that behavior? And if your condo does not permit them, it is prohibited, how do you ensure that that prohibition is enforced? And I think that is a really good jumping off point to pass the floor over to Ben, because Ben and Condor Security, they're on the ground, they're dealing with the short-term rentals. They're the first line of attack, if you will. So Ben, I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Louis, and good morning, everyone. Thank you, Anthony, for organizing this session this morning. Louis is correct. You know, this has been relatively new venture for us as an organization, and majority of the practices that we're going to talk today have been really through trial and error, and to seeing what has worked and what has not worked. There's no standards. There's been no real, guidelines in place for how to deal with short-term rentals. So we've been able to learn and adapt throughout the way. I'm going to talk about 4 specific areas, in particular, the connection to short-term rentals and security. The first will be compliance and enforcement. Louis talked briefly about it. And I'm sure Katherine has a lot more to address from the property manager's perspective. Then really, what are those identifiers of short-term rental units? Then we're going to talk about some security and safety issues, and as well as prevention. So let's talk about compliance and enforcement. We know that there's some corporations that short-term rentals are allowed. With those, you need to make sure that you have good controls, good measures to be able to manage these units, to make sure that there's compliance in place, that anyone that is registered, there's a specific lease with the maximum threshold required for that lease, to make sure names, information of all those transients are in place, and have the right processes to be able to govern it. So now let's talk about those situations that it is not allowed. Inversely, the better controls that you have of your property, of individuals that are should be in the building, lease control, registration control, this is what's going to be able to assist you, that you have a good audit of who should be there and who shouldn't be there. Next is the reporting of these units. So if it's legal units, they need to be registered. They need to provide you with the right information that they are registered with the city, whichever city that obviously you're residing in. And if they're not, then obviously to report those units to the local authorities. Every city has their own authorities. For example, City of Toronto is 311. They have their own unit. It's headed by Wes Neal, that deals with these. I can't talk about how responsive they are, but eventually they'll get to you. And different cities like Mississauga, Vaughan, they have their own divisions. Some are run by the same people that will do the bylaw enforcement. So every city and municipality right now has teams that deal with this. So we do encourage the reporting of non-registered, and obviously those that are prohibited are going to be reported to those cities. So let's talk about some identifiers. Again, some of these are going to make sense. Some you're going to have that light on. Hey, how come you didn't think about it? So first and foremost, excessive key requests and exchanges. So if you have a pattern, and I'll tell you how we do it. If you have a pattern of specific units, that there's a lot of key exchanges. There's a lot of situations. Hey, I lost my key. Can someone open it for me? It's a heads up. The way that we do it is we do a lot of analytics. So we'll take a month sample of all the reports, and we will break down the reports based on key type reports, and then we will isolate units. So if one specific unit has excessive key-related issues, we flag them as possible STR units. Next is same thing, excessive visitors. If you have a particular unit, I know some people, they're very social and they have a lot of friends, but if there's a regular inflow of visitors, especially not the same kind, it's a heads up that possibly the units are being used for short-term rentals. And also people arriving with bags and luggages. It's a heads up that these units are being used for STR purposes. The other item, which is a big giveaway, is them not knowing where to go. And a lot of times asking hotel-like questions like, where is room service? Or expecting the concierge to take their stuff up. You have no idea how many times we get that. That's a big giveaway. Who's going to help me with my luggage? So that being said, that's also a big giveaway. If those things do come through, make sure you're going to address that with your concierge and security to look out for that, to look out for those reports and excessive key exchanges and excessive visitors. Now, as with any other activity, the more people come through your common areas, it's wear and tear. This is the reason why car value goes down the more you drive it. Same thing. So the more individuals that are going through your elevator, going through your lobbies, going through your common areas, the more people that are using your gyms, using your amenities, it's wear and tear. It's obviously a nuisance for those individuals that live in the building and should enjoy it. So cost of your maintenance will go up based on that. And obviously cleaning and damages to the building. Higher likelihood of security incidents. So we see that with particularly some of our STR allowed properties. Definitely more partying, more noise complaints, much more loitering, definitely much more non-compliance to condo rules because they don't care. There's no ramifications. They're there for a day. They're there for 2 days. They want to milk it. They want to get the most out of it. And they have a high disregard for both the actual unit and also what's happening outside the unit. And trespassing. They usually will invite their friends, their buddies to come into the building. One of the things that we actually do, even for those properties that short-term rentals are allowed, we ask for a list of all the registrants. So if those registrants want to bring their friends, want to bring people that they met, they meet at the clubs or the restaurants, it is not allowed. So we encourage anyone over here that is managing an allowed short-term rental building to practice that. It will definitely reduce the amount of incidents and individuals coming in and trespassing incidents. Now let's talk about prevention. We spoke about compliance, we spoke about identifying it, we spoke about related issues, how we can prevent these from happening. Obviously, this is related to properties that short-term rentals are prohibited. First and foremost, we touched upon it, strict lease and registration control. Making sure that no one is allowed to move in unless they have that lease and it's approved and they're registered in the system, and making sure that you're keeping your records up to date. Reporting the short-term rentals to the local bylaw authorities. We spoke about it. You're creating a record, obviously, to also address that legally. I'm sure Louis will talk about it with your corporation counsel. The next item, which really bugs me because I see it in a lot of condos, is lockbox control. And you definitely see this in properties that they don't have controls. They don't have areas where lockboxes are allowed. I know real estate agents, they need to do their job. However, to make sure that anyone that is allowed to affix a lockbox in your property, they are doing it with the right authority. You are controlling it, which means that if you see lockboxes around the property, you have every right to cut them, to remove them, because most likely they're being used for this practice. The next area, which it's not here, but I want to talk about, and it's a good segue on community security. Your best eyes are your community members. So train them to report suspicious activities. So they get smart. A lot of times they tell these individuals, don't go through the lobby, go through the underground garage. So the best individuals to be able to catch that are community members. So if you have a unit, there's people coming into your floors that you don't recognize, they're coming in with luggages almost every other day, encourage your residents community members to report that to the management or to the concierge. That is it with my slides. I'm going to pass it over to Louis. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ben. So one thing I didn't mention at the outset is we're going to try to keep our presentation to about 40 minutes and then allow about 20 minutes of questions. I'm seeing great questions and comments coming in, so don't think that they're being ignored. We'll try and get to them at the end as we get through our content. But next, I think it would be really great to hear from Katherine. She's got an amazing anecdote about the great work at how Crossbridge handled a short-term renter, and I won't spoil anything more. Go ahead, Katherine.
And I feel terribly because Cam and Aaron are on the call, so maybe raise your hand just so that folks can recognize you. Some of my other team members are also on the call who've heard a little bit about Cam and Aaron's story. And I'm going to also talk about some of the other folks in my portfolio who've had success in taking reports that come from Ben and his desk and enable us to appropriately deal with short-term rentals. So much like what Ben had mentioned previously, Cam and Aaron in the office, and they can correct me where I get some of the details wrong because they did all of the heavy lifting. have a request for another fob for a unit, a 2-bedroom unit. And it's definitely the third. It might be the fourth even. And of course, in asking for a copy of the lease, it's a really peculiar lease because it's making mention of common areas, but they're not talking about amenity spaces and areas and how common areas are used. And one of the tenants clammed up right away and wouldn't participate, but Cam got some really great details from one of the other tenants. And what we came to find out is this older building with large, spacious condominium units had renovated this unit to take it from a 2-bedroom unit to make it into a 4-plex, and was renting these units individually to 4 separate tenants. In addition to which, this particular owner had already purchased a second unit and had already submitted an application for renovation of that unit. Renovations in Cam's building are not uncommon. The building, I think, is about 50 years old, Cam. Everybody is improving it. And the renovation application didn't look like anything that we should be worried about. Cam did a little bit more research, finding out the name of a company from the tenant, Pearson Housing. Cam's building happens to be in the neighborhood of the Toronto, oh my goodness, it's the old Ryerson campus, and Toronto Metropolitan University campus. So it's popular for students just already and out the gate. So Cam and his crew, they are used to agreements where, you know, people are sharing it as roommates. And we come to find, or Cam did rather, that not only is his building on that website, but so are a number of condominiums, which he is aware probably don't allow this kind of short-term tenancy. And Cam does the extraordinary good work of contacting all of the properties that were listed on that website at the time to speak with the condominium managers. This was just before Christmas, and let them know that this was in place. The other thing that Cam did was take, of course, screenshots of all of this evidence that he found, because you and I both know as soon as you start engaging with the owner, the very first thing that's going to disappear is a lot of this evidence of malfeasance, of bad things that are being done. Cam also contacted the corporation solicitor to find out what could be done about the unit that was being renovated at the time. And we suspected, because it was listed as coming soon, going to be leased in the same kind of way, and also got in touch with the fire inspector. And he got in touch with the fire inspector because we wanted some additional leverage with respect to things in the unit which might be contrary to fire code. That neighborhood is well known to the fire department in Toronto. It's around the corner from the big Wellesley fire, which was very damaging, left people unhoused for many, many months. And with all of these things in place, I was actually impressed and in some ways shocked at what Cam was able to leverage. So an immediate stop work to the units that were under renovation, and closure of electricity to those units to bring them into compliance. I probably would have bet my dollar on the fact that Cam couldn't have taken such drastic action, but it was supported by the solicitor and helped in gaining a written compliance from the owner in returning the units to their prior condition and only showing units once it was listed for sale, and gaining control over that situation. So I give Cam a huge round of applause on behalf of everybody in condo land for taking every action available to him and quickly gaining compliance. A lot of the items that are requirements necessitate some good documentation. So kudos to Cam in getting that good documentation. The reason for the short-term rental compliance, and the reason why I think the City of Toronto is also interested, though slow moving, in resolving a number of these items, is because they are cutting into the legitimate hotel industry in Toronto. And we are a world-class city, and the safety of people in the city is being compromised because of it. If you look at legitimate short-term rental companies, their platforms are listed, they are licensed with the City of Toronto, and they pay the 6% municipal accommodation tax. This is part of the public coffers, part of money that is owed to each of us who live in the City of Toronto, in order to be able to take care of the city the way we want it to. If you are like me and occasionally look up things while you are on a call, I welcome you to have a look at the City of Toronto short-term lease website. Though imperfect, and I'm certain constantly under renovation, for lack of a better way of putting it, there are some really good, 10 things you should know about short-term leases, things that companies should know. And this is all information and detail that I think you can use as a condominium manager, whether you do permit short-term leases or you don't. I saw a quick question about a number of the red flags that Ben had mentioned, not really applying to townhouse complexes. And I think some of the same reservation information and registration information would. So you might look to gain compliance from all of your owners with respect to registering the vehicles they expect to have in their parking spaces. One of the reasons why I think this might be relevant, if you're a large enough townhome complex to be able to participate in either a regular parking enforcement patrol or a regular security patrol, this gives your security officers the tools they need in order to identify if there are strange people on site. Ben and I worked together on an unusual case, not specifically related to short-term leases, but relating to people who were casing the joint. So they were waiting off the property and they were looking to follow people off site and steal their vehicles. This kind of registration in condo land can help not only with short-term leases, right? So if there's a new vehicle in the driveway every weekend, dollars to donuts, that's somebody who's short-term renting their townhouse on the weekend. And I think, again, yes, I've had good success in a letter to fellow owners, not only deterring short-term rentals, but gaining what I call the support of solid citizens. I can't be in the room for every conversation in the elevator or in the parkette when folks are walking their dog as to why short-term rentals aren't permitted in this community and maybe shouldn't be permitted in condo land ever. But that's not a conversation that I need to have if people who are your neighbors can also provide the same kind of information in detail. And those solid citizens will be your supporters if and when you have a movement by people who perhaps do want to have short-term rentals be permitted in their condominium corporation. I think I know that Luis will probably tackle some of the additional questions that you have about kind of declaration terms that might include it and what you may or may not be able to do to avoid it. Communication matters, in my opinion. Making sure that folks understand all of the risks and why it's so important. The other thing that Salim has in his building at the concierge desk, in the elevators, are little sign placards. This corporation does not support, they are illegal, however it's phrased, to have short-term rentals. No lease less than, I think in his case, it's 6 months, but he'll correct me in the comments section or the question section if I'm incorrect. And this information is good and helpful. A lot of the higher end platforms actually have reimbursements to folks who have unwittingly entered into an agreement to rent or lease short-term a property that is unavailable for it. And it does help in deterring those kinds of activities on site or on the property. I want to make sure that there's a lot of good opportunity for us all to answer some of your questions. I will share some of the areas and sections from the Toronto website that I have available to me. And I am aware that already in Ottawa region, they are similarly looking to have regulation and tracking of short-term rentals. And it is, again, not only because all of these cities are poor and they want to collect some funds from people who aren't playing by the rules, but because they feel it poses a significant risk to life safety. People in condominiums know where the exits are. People in condominiums know how to exit properly. People in condominiums know how best to protect themselves in the case of a fire. In hotels, there are different fire and life safety systems available. In hotels, there are maps on the back of every door as to how to escape. In hotels, there's this more significant staffing load to assist in evacuation where it's necessary. And these are some of the reasons why condominiums should not be used as short-term hotels. It just isn't an appropriate occupancy.
I think that could not have been more well said. Thank you, Catherine. That was amazing. And we'll move on to Anthony, because Anthony has some really great tools to show us, but some pretty interesting anecdotes of his own personal experience as well. So go ahead, Anthony.
Thanks, Luis. I'll just share my screen really quickly. And yeah, as Luis mentioned, I do have a short-term rental anecdote. It's a bit different from Catherine's, a different type of mood, and it's more of a horror story that relates to short-term rentals. This is an actual event that happened in around 2012 in the condo that I happen to still live in. So it hasn't scared me away quite yet. But the reason why I remember that it happened in 2012 is because I remember I was browsing my BlackBerry smartphone, while waiting for the elevator to take my dog down for a walk on a Saturday night. And I remember the door opening, and as I took a step in, I'm still browsing my BlackBerry, and then my dog started to go berserk. He was barking like crazy. He was pulling the leash, and I was like, what the heck is going on? So I glanced up and I noticed there's only one other individual in the elevator. It's a man, and he just looked very disheveled. He looked like he was in his own world. And the most obvious sign that something was off was that, well, he was just absolutely covered in blood. Like he was like drenched in blood. And when I looked at him, made eye contact with him, it literally conjured images of the Grim Reaper in my mind. So I've created this image here to help everyone sort of visualize what I sort of imagined while in the elevator. Yes, I made this. It was not AI, and I did not pay a very expensive designer. It was actually me, believe it or not. So when I saw him, looked him in the eye, I said, nope. And I just left that elevator and calmly walked back to my condo. So when I returned to my condo, the first thing I did was I locked the door and I took a peek through my peephole, just hoping that he did not get off on my floor. And luckily for me, he got off on my floor. So I went into my kitchen, I grabbed the sharpest object I could find, and I just, kept monitoring the situation. And I noticed for about a minute or two, he was just sort of stumbling around on my floor. And at some point, he finally went into the stairwell, whereupon I knew, hey, our floor is secure because that stairwell door is locked. I tried calling our security, and I finally got through to them, and they told me that they knew what was going on and that police were coming. So as some of you who might know me know that I happen to serve on my condo board as well. And because of that, I was privy to additional information about what happened. So when all the dust settled, I learned from my property manager that that individual that I met in the elevator, who was covered in blood and looked like he was in his own world, happened to be a tenant in a short-term rental unit. So he was a short-term rental tenant in my condo. This is back in 2012, before Airbnb even took off in Toronto. What's even more interesting is he wasn't here to party. He wasn't renting out a short-term unit to party. He wasn't here to commit any crimes. He was actually a business executive on a business trip. He actually happened to work for a very recognizable Fortune 500 company. And it was that Saturday night that he decided to consume some type of drug, which put him in some type of hallucinatory state. And while in that state of mind, he decided to kick the window pane on his balcony with his bare foot and break it, which caused his foot to bleed profusely, and in a panic state started running around the entire condo. He managed to get onto about 5 or 6 floors, and he just left the place all bloody. So the carpets, the walls, the doors, and even the ceilings were bloody. It looked like a crime scene, and it was very very unpleasant. So the aftermath was basically police, ambulance, and hazmat teams were called on site. Thankfully, this was before social media, so not a lot of this actually got exposed. But the hazmat team had to bleach everything because of all of the hazardous material, blood everywhere. So that meant that we had to get completely new carpets. You had to repaint the walls and the doors, and we needed to get new wallpaper as well. You're all property managers. We have 535 property managers on this webinar. You all know that generally speaking, we don't keep inventory of a lot of carpet or wallpapers in stock. So we had to buy new carpet, new wallpaper, and it's not easy finding the same carpet or wallpaper. So suddenly we have about 5 or 6 floors that have unmatching carpets and wallpaper. There were a lot of angry owners and angry parents, and our property manager spent weeks navigating repairs, collections, and answering questions. So it's events like these, which is why we found it so important to set up a CPE webinar on short-term rentals and the risks that come along with it. As Louise mentioned, some of you might know me more from Condonexus. We provide hosted virtual meeting and advanced proxy voting solutions for condos. We happen to work with about 900 condos in Ontario right now, and through this privileged sort of position, we do get a great glimpse at the problems that take place at condos. So we do sit in a lot of AGMs and we hear the concerns that owners bring up. And one very common concern that owners bring up, especially in high-rise rentals, is short-term rentals. So I should say high-rise towers, not high-rise rentals, is short-term rentals. So when we heard this past winter that the City of Toronto now makes their data accessible to all owners, their short-term rental registration data accessible to all owners, we were amazed. We said, we need to get this data out to property managers so they can see which units are being rented on a short-term basis. We need to make it free, we need to make it accessible, and we need to make it super user-friendly. So I'm going to give you guys all a demo of our free online application where you can look for units that are short-term rentals in your condo. But just before I do that, I'm going to spend about a minute talking about ICE condos. ICE condos, it's a condo that many of you may have heard of. There's 2 towers in the downtown core, and they are notorious for having many Airbnbs. They have gone viral. They did go viral over the last year, Instagram and TikTok, about just a regular stream of crime and a regular stream of police activity at those condos. And I can't help but think that Airbnb may have contributed to that, the high presence of short-term tenants. I do understand that they are under new management now, and there's a new team on board, so I can't speak to what conditions are now, because with the new management team, they may have new strategies to handle these things. But one question I do want to pose to everyone here, and I'll make this a draw, so that we'll give away a $20 Starbucks gift card for anyone that can guess the number of short-term rentals at ICE condos. So there's about 1,100 units in total at ICE. You're welcome to type into the chat how many short-term rentals you think exist in these 2 condos. And in 20 seconds, in 15 seconds, I'm going to close it off, and I will give it. I will award a $20 gift card to the person who's closest, but not over. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to turn off the chat right now. So if you didn't get your question in, unfortunately, that is it. And somehow someone guessed 2,100 short-term rentals, even though I mentioned there's only 1,100 units in the condo. The actual answer, I'm going to get the specific number, but I think right now it's 241 of the 1,100 units at ICE condos is short-term rental. So I saw a number that was close to that, and I will reach out to that individual later on to send them a $10 Starbucks gift card. But what you might be surprised to find out is ICE doesn't even necessarily have the most short-term rentals in all of Toronto. So here are the top three. Parade 2, which is by the Rogers Center, has 252. ICE here with 239. This is a sort of outdated number, has 239. And there's a condo on Peter Street that has 111. Some of you might know another condo in downtown that also happens to have a substantial amount around this level. I understand that condo was sort of developed with short-term rental in mind, so it was sort of intentional. So I've left that condo off here. But these are three condos that sort of morphed into having a lot of short-term rentals. So the question is, how many short-term rentals are in your condo? So I will now demo our free online application where you can see for yourself how many short-term rentals are in your condo. So all you have to do is you have to go to www.condonexus.com. You'll go to the top tab, resources, and hit short-term rental finder, where you'll be able to see our short-term rental finder. I will actually just open it up for you guys right here on the right. Oops, and we'll just do a quick demo so everyone can get a sense of how it works. Again, we'll just type in a street like Dan Leckie Way, or let's be more specific. Let's type in 38 Dan Leckie Way, right? So if I type in 38 Dan Leckie Way, as you can see, we get the short-term rental registrations in the city of Toronto for 38 Dan Leckie Way, and there happens to be 7. You get to see the registration numbers with the city of Toronto, the address, and the units. And what's really beautiful also is that if you'd like just to, have an easy way to be notified if any new short-term registrations are made to the city of Toronto for 38 Dan Leckie Way, you can set up a notification with us as well. You just have to put in your email address, and we will literally automatically send you a notification every time another registration shows up that's mapped to your condo. And in fairness, the city of Toronto also provides this data. What we find is it's not very user-friendly, and it's a bit buggy, which is why we really want to build our own portal. But I will show you the city of Toronto's data very quickly. If you're able to find this site, so that's like the first problem of not being user-friendly. Like if you're able to find this site, you'll have to go down to Explore Data and click this button that says Visualize. You get this GUI that eventually pops up. It's a bit slow, it seems. And it's loading, there you go. And let's say I want to type in 38 Dan Leckie Way. You'd expect there to be 7 units that are short-term rentals because we use the same data. I'll hit enter and it does not find anything. So that's a bit weird. I will type in just Dan Leckie, maybe it'll find 38 Dan Leckie, nothing there. Maybe I'll try to type in just Dan Leckie. Weirdly, nothing shows up, but we're using the exact same data. Weirdly, if I type in 38 Dan, the 7 units show up. So as you can see, the City of Toronto's website, it can be a bit buggy. So that's why we want to build this so that property managers have an easy way of finding their condo. If your condo happens to have a short-term rental unit, the address will auto-complete, and that'll make it that makes everything a lot more accurate and user-friendly. So again, go on the website, look up your condo, set up a notification so that if a short-term rental registration ever appears for the City of Toronto, you'll get that in your email. And with that, okay, I'll pass it back to Luis.
Thanks, Anthony. So I'm mindful that we only have 15 minutes left, and we've heard a lot of great content from our presenters. And we also have, I think at this point, 66 questions in the Q&A. So some of those are numbers and for the vote on the number of Airbnbs in the condos, but I think still we've got a fair bit to go through. So I'm going to try and put on my AGM hat right now and pretend that we're in other business and go through a lot of questions. But before I do, I'm going to take 5 minutes because I think there's one piece that we haven't talked about yet, which I'm sure a lot of people on this call are very interested in, which is the enforcement piece. So you've found Airbnbs by using Condonexus's tool, or you've been notified by management or security that they have identified units that, you know, have all these red flags and are short-term renting. And the question is now, what do you do? And, you know, Katherine described an amazing example. The only caveat that I have to give on that anecdote is just make sure to get that legal advice to make sure that you're taking steps that are appropriate, because the last thing you want to do is overstep and find yourself in a worse situation. But, you know, high level, I think the best way to describe it is it's a symphony, and every part of the condo is an instrument in that symphony. You know, my office, legal counsel, works together with management, works with security. We work with the residents and the unit owners to really build the evidence and the case to make sure that you are enforcing it to the best of your ability. And it starts off with first the identification. You've identified the unit, but then with the documentation and the evidence. So I know for a fact when these things are being red flagged by security, they're writing incident reports, and they're writing detailed incident reports that are telling you what happened, when it happened, you know. Go back to your elementary days, who, what, when, where, why, and all of that needs to be contained. You're summarizing and keeping all of the email complaints that you're getting from unit owners and residents, because, you know, most of the time it's not as obvious that these things are happening, right? But they become apparent when there are nuisance issues. And that's really when, you know, really stuff starts hitting the fan, if you will. But once that happens, you know, then your management needs to get involved, and they need to correspond with the unit owner and the tenants and give them warnings and let them know of the rules and the behaviors that need to be followed. If you're in a regulatory condo, then, you know, you need to provide ID in advance, and you need to register your short-term tenant, and you need to provide the reservation 48 hours in advance, for example. Or if you're in a prohibition condo, then you tell them you're not allowed to do this. We have a single family use provision. It's in the rules that we're not allowing short-term transient tenancies. And then eventually, when that stops working, or it just never works, then you have built up a record, a case that again gets plopped onto my desk. And I have a fulsome record of incident reports and pictures of reservations on phones. And I have, you know, email complaints from residents about interactions that they met a bloody person on the elevator, or, you know, that kind of situation. And I have all of the warning letters from management and the back and forth with the owners. And at that point, that's when we enter the compliance stage, where the lawyers will get involved and we'll send a compliance letter and we'll say, we have this evidence, you need to stop. And if you don't stop, then we're going to take further action. And by the way, you're also responsible for our legal costs, because all the other owners should not have to pay for your non-compliance. And a lot of the times, you know, if you consider this, to use another metaphor, like a highway, there are different exit ramps. Some people will learn after they get a complaint from, you know, security telling them that, hey, you know, we found out you've got a short-term renter. And it's like, the gig is up. Then other people will stop at the management phase when they get the letters and they warn them, you know, if this keeps going, it'll go to the lawyer. Some people stop at the lawyer phase where they get the compliance letter. However, some people, they're persistent, unfortunately. And in those situations, that's when it escalates, right? And this is that entire record I just described. The evidence is incredibly important, because the next step is going to court. And going to court is something where it's not simply making the allegation or suspicions. We have to satisfy a judge that your suspicion is reasonable, that you have evidence to back this up, and that you've made reasonable efforts to try and address it, and that court was your last resort. And There's a reason for that. The courts are very busy. There's a lot of cases out there. It's hard to get in front of a judge. It takes time nowadays. And on top of that, you're dealing in the legal system. So you have to meet certain levels of burden of proof, right? You're not in a criminal proceeding, so it doesn't have to be beyond a reasonable doubt, but you need to be able to have a preponderance of the evidence. You need to be able to show that on its totality, yeah, it's pretty obvious that this person is doing short-term rentals. And again, back to the symphony example, we all work together in this. It takes everybody involved to make this work. And with that, go ahead, Catherine, before I jump into the questions.
Yeah, no worries. And you can start organizing the questions because there are like a million of them. I have tried kind of in between speakers to populate the chat with the websites for some of the largest municipalities that I'm aware of: Vaughan, Brampton, Mississauga, Ottawa. And it gives you specifically details with respect to their short-term rental bylaws, enforcement mechanisms. And again, bureaucracy at the city level tends to be really slow, no matter which municipality you're talking about or to or with. But I really encourage you to make reports where you know or suspect that this is taking place. And it's again because whether the corporation takes legal action or ultimately the municipality does, based on a preponderance of the evidence that's provided, I think this is really important. And it's not only from a health and safety perspective, it is also from an availability of rental housing perspective. So a number of the municipalities only limit the number of available short-term rental days to a specific brief period. And one of the reasons for it is, again, these are intended to be permanent residents for single families or others, and they aren't available in the marketplace because they're being used as hotels. The other thing that I think we need to mention is, are there loopholes? Are people doing funny things in order to not be targeted as a short-term rental? Yeah, this is my cousin. These people are here for the year, but all of a sudden they end the tenancy after 30 days. Again, it will be about collecting those leases and then demonstrating that, okay, but over the last 6 months, you've had 6 year-long leases, each of which has been terminated after 30 days. It is more suspicious. It is more unusual. And let's face it, in the city of Toronto, frankly, in any major metropolitan city in Canada, finding a long-term tenant is really not the issue. It's about finding a place that somebody can rent. So I think that evidence is really important. You might look to investigate. There are some companies now that are also offering what I would call capture programs. There are gazillions of short-term rental companies that are offering advertising. And it could be a full-time job. And you and I both know that as managers, we have already like 12 other full-time jobs that we need to do on a daily basis. Where you can contract with a company like that, Arshad, who happens to be on the call as well, is another one of my managers. And at his property, they do have a company that does that. Each time they have a capture, they send him detailed information with respect to who, what, when, where, how, well, hi. And all of that detail is then used to bill back to the offender. And I think that's a great use of time and effort in trying to control this issue, because the short distance on all of the questions, and Luis has, probably 24 that relate to who does this, who collects the leases, who looks at this, who looks at that. You and I both know the answer to that. It's always the manager.
I could not agree more. And, Catherine, I really appreciate that. I have so many questions and I wish we could get to all of them. I'm going to try and hit some of the high level ones as best I can. And, we may stay an extra 5 minutes if people are okay, just to try and get through some of them, but not really much more than that, because I do want to respect everyone's time on here today. So one thing I really want to emphasize first is, especially with the Condonexus tool, the short-term finder, it's a great tool. Be mindful that these are people that are already inclined to follow the rules to some degree, right? They're actually registering with the city of Toronto. So it's a very helpful tool. It's not an automatic, right, to say that you can't find it there. That means there's no short-term rentals, right? Additionally, it's only for the city of Toronto, because I saw there's some questions about the applicability of the jurisdiction. Right now, the city of Toronto is the only one that has that type of resource available. I think there are, and it was mentioned that the Ottawa region is looking to do that as well. So I'm sure over time, other ones will start following suit. So I'm going to power through some of these Q&As, so I apologize for putting on my fast speaking voice, but if an owner has stopped doing short-term rentals, does the unit details automatically get removed from the City of Toronto short-term rental website? I'm going to assume that the answer is no. The license is for a period of time, so as long as they are registered and the registration is maintained as valid, they would be on the website. So if a declaration allows for short-term rentals, can a rule be introduced to introduce a single family use provision? That's a yes and no question. You'll love to hear a lot of "it depends" from lawyers, but the answer is it does depend. At the end of the day, you can introduce them, but their enforceability is where it's challenging. They have been upheld as being enforceable in your declaration, and there's a reason for that. That is it's like your constitution. It's making sure that that is ingrained into the fabric of your condo. However, in your rules, it may not be deemed reasonable. It can be challenged. So if it's regulation via rules, you want to talk to your lawyers and make sure that you're looking at what provisions already exist that you can build on and what provisions you can add on. So for example, you might not be able to restrict single family use provisions, though believe me, I've seen a lot of condos that try, and you can put in other restrictions about short-term tenancies and minimum lease terms and things of that nature. Question regarding the lease being referred to by the speaker. Who is processing this for the corporation? Do you set limits? That's really the manager. They're getting a lot of that information, but one thing that's important to note is pursuant to the Condo Act and then most condos rules, the obligation to notify the condo about a lease is put on the unit owner. It's not something that the corporation is actively investigating, though I'm sure management and security here will tell you that the occasional audit to make sure that your information is up to date has never hurt anyone. And I'm seeing Ben nodding, so thank you for the nod of approval there. This one's interesting. Is it reasonable to ask for monthly pest control reports from registered short-term rental landlords? I would say, again, it depends. Probably not reasonable on just an ad hoc random basis, but if there's some indicia that there are pest control issues, or there have been before, then certainly there are circumstances where that could be appropriate. So let's see, I'm scrolling here a little bit. We've got a lot here. So if the builder was trying to sell a residential unit to a neighboring business and stated, you know what, I'm really sorry, Dragos, this one is going to have to be go to your lawyer because it's a very specific question. It's not quite as general. How would property manager control excessive visitors from entering these leased spaces? And I lost it because the question went up. Sorry, it moved. How would a property manager control excessive visitors from entering these leased spaces? Do we ask as part of the lease the names of the occupants? So, I think maybe Ben and Katherine, you can answer about what you guys typically see in terms of forms and asking for information.
Yeah, so definitely there is a form that has to be pre-submitted. In that form has the list of who are the registrants. And that information needs to be sent prior to them receiving the key and having access to the unit. So 100% yes, that you could ask for the information as far as who those individuals are. As I mentioned in my presentation, this is a great way of making sure that you're not going to have excess individuals just coming and going, that you're limiting the access only to those individuals that are registrants. And no more.
And I think that kind of responsible platforms where you are a corporation that does permit short-term leasing, they actually have specific fines for folks who violate the terms of the short-term occupancy. And so, for instance, I might book a short-term lease for my daughter and I to stay at a property. If I then invite 20 of our closest friends for a big blowout, a lot of the better platforms, they actually have a fine per additional person. So it's a means through which of looking to not only regulate, but to also reimburse and compensate where there are issues and problems. Definitely, I'm a firm believer in if somebody is residing in the unit, they should be properly listed and registered. And that's for kind of safety across the board. If there were ever, knock on Naugahyde, God forbid, a major emergency on the site, the fire department, the police services will be looking for a list of all of the occupants to make sure that they're all safe. If my mom and dad are staying with me, if my cousin is staying with me, I have no issue in listing them as a resident of the unit for the 3 months that they're staying. That's one of the questions. Strangely, people don't want to list as a permanent resident of the unit somebody who is a short-term renter. They start to have concerns over ownership questions that might arise from that kind of a registration. And the other thing that also, of course, applies and dovetails to some of the short-term leasing restrictions and requirements is what your rules say about guests. And so, for instance, guests often are compelled to be accompanied in amenity spaces by the owner. And so that will help to restrict folks who perhaps ought not be or should not be entitled to certain areas of the property. And I'm thinking more with a view to folks where short-term leasing is allowed or permitted, and they may or may not have access to certain amenities, fitness center, pool, etc.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. So I am seeing here someone has requested if we could provide our email addresses. I'm providing mine as a lawyer. It's on my website, so you guys can, well, it should be. It's not up there just yet, but it's being revamped. So I'm putting it in the chat. I do see a lot of questions. One dealing, for example, with what course of action should a corporation take to ensure compliance with registration, license registration? So I think this is a really great question because it's important to note that if you are in a building that doesn't explicitly prohibit short-term rentals, then what you should be doing is, to a degree, really advocating for its regulation. So you should have rules in place that say, if you are a short-term rental, you need to provide your short-term rental license. You need to provide proof of insurance. You need to register your short-term renters in advance. And that's something that you can really work with your lawyers to really carve out or craft the right rule for your community. Because as Anthony mentioned in his demo, there are some buildings that were explicitly designed with short-term rentals in mind, right? So you can have provisions in your rules about people coming in to clean the units and what entrances they can use, right? Because you don't want or the use of cleaning carts in the hallways, because you don't want your building to turn into effectively a hotel. There's a couple questions that have come up on the chargebacks as well, and I want to clarify here. And I hate to be the lawyer, but everything that's being said here today is legal information. It is not legal advice. Every situation is unique, and insofar as the ability to charge back is something that is debated, this is something that is a constant question and challenge in the condo industry about charging back, especially legal costs, because there are CAT cases and court cases actually that stand for the proposition that you can't charge back legal costs absent a court order or some type of order from the CAT. However, there are also varying opinions that depends on the strength of your indemnity provisions, and it really depends on a case-by-case basis. We also find that in many circumstances, owners are prepared to pay the chargeback at first instance because they are trying to avoid the registration of a lien on their unit or further escalation of the issues. So even though it's circumstance dependent, there are many circumstances where I know lawyers will tell their clients, you can try and charge it back. If it gets to the point where they don't pay and you have to lien, then we may have a different conversation about whether you want to go down that road. But doesn't necessarily hurt in the first instance to try and recover. But that is something that really is a case-by-case basis. It depends what your condo docs say. Some have really simple provisions, some have very detailed, complex provisions that are unequivocal. You know what? I have so many questions that I don't think I can distill them in a way that would be appropriate. But I think what I will do is I will ask each one of our panelists, and I will go last, as to give one tip or takeaway that you would like our listeners to have today. Well, I guess one tip that you would like them to take away after this webinar. And I do apologize to everyone for not being able to get to all your questions, but I think this is going to be a nice little summary encapsulating our thoughts. So Anthony, why don't we start with you, because you're at the top of my screen.
Absolutely. And we at Condonexus understand the property managers are always super busy. So just to help you guys out, go onto our website, use our short-term rental finder, and set up a notification. That way you'll know if a new short-term rental registration has been registered at the City of Toronto. You don't need to go searching for it. You don't have to worry about your board or your owners finding out about it first. Set up that notification and have more peace of mind.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Ben.
So my suggestion is going to stress all property managers out. However, it's going to be short-term pain, but long-term gain. Make an effort to update your records. Make an effort to have those controls in place. There was a question over here about, how do you control the installation of lock boxes? There's those bars that you can get, put it in your, P1 visitor. Have controls of who is coming in and out of your property. The more controls, the more records of who's coming in and who's going and who shouldn't be coming in and who should be coming in. This is what's going to prevent these situations from happening, and having the ability to decipher between who is a short-term guest and who is not. And even though your property is going to have short-term guests, make an effort that you're going to know who those individuals are. So my best advice is update your records and have better controls in place to make sure that, all aspects of your operation, you have those checks and balances in place.
I couldn't agree with Ben more. At least I figured you were coming to be next, so I didn't waste time waiting for the introduction. Fob audits, detailed records sometimes fall off our plate of things to do, and quickly, because of everything else that feels like it's on fire in our day-to-day. But the reason why these fundamentals, these basics, are so crucial is because it gives all of the people on your team the tools they need in order to be effective in gathering evidence where you need it, for solid citizens to make good reports and communicate more. So in particular, before you embark on a new registration process or program, as you start to change how people can and do move throughout your property, make sure you tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it. At the end of the day, this is all about making their home more secure, more livable, and more cost-effective for them as an individual homeowner. And they will appreciate it when they know those details. Otherwise, it starts to feel uncomfortable sometimes. So that's a very big tip. You can never communicate enough. It is said you have to tell people 10 times in 3 different ways. So be really creative about how you can tell them, and make sure that every member of your team knows and understands the message, so that even the newest person on the desk on a Sunday night can tell folks why we're doing this registration, why it's important, and at the end of the day, what's in it for them. Because, as a terrible boss once told me from a completely different industry, everything is a sale. And I didn't believe him because I'm not a salesperson, but now that I'm older and I'm smarter, he was right. People want to know why they should comply. And there are tons of good reasons why.
Amazing. And as a last piece, and I'm just going to build on something that you said, Catherine, my takeaway is work together. You're part of a team. I know a lot of property managers in these situations they feel like the world is on top of them, right? That you have to take control of the situation, but you have a team around you. You know, you've got a board that gives you instructions that you should rely on. Not every board is the most reliable though, but you also have head office, you have a security team, you have legal counsel, you have outside providers like Condonexus. Really, you're not alone. And this is a very challenging situation and one that requires a lot of work, unfortunately. So, you know, really lean on those that are around you with expertise and the ability to help you, right? Sometimes it's simply a matter of sending out an email or a quick phone call, and you could get someone like Katherine or Ben on the line who will say, you know what, I've had this exact same thing happen somewhere else. And they can sort of guide you through that process. And, you know, us lawyers, we're there for you. We're your last resort measure. You know, we know you don't like calling us, but we're there when you do. So really, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you, Ben. Really appreciated your insight today. One final question that I'm going to answer because it's relevant to everyone. The name of the CPE is a short-term fix dealing with short-term rentals and nuisance in condos. So you can find that on the CMRAO website under the continuing professional education page. It is listed there. You are eligible for 1 hour of CPE for having attended this seminar today. So once again, thank you all for attending. I know it's only Thursday, but I'm going to wish you all an early good weekend. And thank you again for joining us today. Ben, Katherine, Anthony, thank you for putting this together. You guys did great.
Perfect. Thank you,
so
everyone.
much, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the 540 or so people that showed up. And thank you, Katherine, Louise, and Ben. Take care, everyone.